It started with a lie, not a loud one, not some dramatic shouting match or a courtroom threat, just a quiet, confident little lie planted right in the middle of my land, like it had always belonged there. And that's what made it dangerous, because people believe confidence way faster than they believe truth. I came home that evening just like I had 1,000 times before, gravel crunching under my truck, the sun dropping low behind the tree line, everything looking exactly the way it always had. Except it wasn't, because stretched across my pasture, slicing through it like a bad scar, were these bright pink survey flags. Not just one or two either. I'm talking a whole line of them, marching straight through land that my family had owned longer than most of that town had even existed. And the thing about land like that, you don't just kind of know it. You know it the way you know your own house in the dark, every dip in the ground, every fence post that leans a little too far left, every old oak that's been there since before your grandparents were born. So the second I saw those flags, I didn't feel confused. I felt insulted, like someone had walked into my living room and started rearranging furniture without asking. I followed the line, slow at first, then faster, and that's when I saw them. A survey crew, 3 guys in neon vests, measuring, hammering stakes into the soil like they owned the place, and standing just behind them, arms crossed, smiling like she'd just closed a deal, was Melissa Carver, president of the Pine Ridge Estates HOA. Now, if you've never dealt with an HOA president who thinks their clipboard is a crown, count yourself lucky. Melissa had that look, you know the one, polite on the surface but sharp underneath, like every word out of her mouth was already halfway to being a rule. I walked up, calm, because losing your temper too early is how you lose the whole game. And I asked her one simple question: why are there people on my land? She didn't hesitate, didn't even blink, just gave me that rehearsed smile and said, "We conducted a boundary adjustment. According to our updated survey, this section now falls under the HOA's jurisdiction." Just like that, like she was talking about moving a mailbox, not redrawing property lines. I actually laughed at first, not because it was funny, but because it was so ridiculous I needed a second to process it. But she kept going, pointing past me toward one of the newer houses on the edge of the development, and that's when I saw it. Fresh lumber stacked neatly, concrete footings poured, a half-built deck stretching outward onto my land. They had already cut through my fence, clean slice, like it was nothing, torn up grass that had taken years to grow in, and started building something permanent. No notice, no conversation, no paperwork, just assumption, just entitlement. And here's the thing, she wasn't bluffing the way amateurs bluff, she believed it. Or at least she believed I'd fold, because people like that don't need truth. They just need confidence and a target that hesitates. She said, "We're improving the community. This benefits everyone." I looked at her, then at the workers, then at the deck creeping into my pasture like it had permission, and I realized something right then. Arguing wasn't going to fix this. Yelling definitely wasn't, because they had already crossed the line, literally and figuratively. And once someone's willing to do that without paperwork, without permission, without even a conversation, you're not dealing with a misunderstanding. You're dealing with a power move, and power moves don't get undone with polite discussions. So I did something that probably confused her more than anything else I could have done. I nodded, said nothing, turned around, and walked back to my truck. I could feel her watching me, probably expecting a confrontation, maybe even hoping for one so she could frame it as me being difficult. But I gave her nothing, and that's what unsettled her. Because silence, real silence, isn't weakness, it's calculation. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that 2 weeks earlier I had hired a forestry crew to clear out brush on the north end of my property. Big job, took heavy equipment, and when they finished phase 1, they left something behind temporarily in my barnyard, a full-size industrial bulldozer. Not some little rental, I'm talking steel tracks, wide blade, the kind of machine that doesn't negotiate, fuel tank full, keys still sitting right where the operator left them. They were coming back for it after finishing another contract. But until then, it was mine to use, and standing there that evening, looking out over those pink flags and that half-built deck, I started to see the situation differently, not as a problem, but as a setup. Because if they were bold enough to build on my land without proof, then they were bold enough to learn a lesson the hard way. And I don't mean yelling, or filing paperwork, or waiting months for some bureaucratic resolution. I mean immediate, undeniable, impossible to ignore reality. I got back in my truck, drove up to the house, and just sat there for a minute, engine off, hands on the wheel, thinking it through. Because once you make a move like that, there's no halfway. You either commit, or you don't, and I've never been the halfway type. The sun finally dropped behind the trees, the pasture went quiet again, and those flags stood there in the fading light like they actually meant something, like they had authority, like they had already won. And I remember thinking, not on my land, not ever. Now let me pause the story for a second, because what Melissa pulled there, that wasn't just bold, it was calculated, and honestly, it's a move you see more often than people think, especially with HOAs that get a little too comfortable playing government without actually being one. According to standard procedure, property boundaries don't just shift because someone in an HOA says so. They're defined by recorded surveys, deeds, and county records, not neighborhood votes or internal decisions, meaning if someone shows up claiming your land suddenly belongs to them without documented proof filed with the county, that's not a gray area, that's trespassing at best, fraud at worst. From a legal perspective, what they did stacking materials, cutting my fence, starting construction, that crosses into multiple violations all at once. You're talking property damage, unlawful entry, and potentially criminal misrepresentation if they knowingly used false survey markers. And here's where it gets interesting, because this is exactly where most people freeze. They assume the HOA must have some kind of authority, some hidden paperwork, some legal advantage they don't understand. And that hesitation, that little moment of, wait, what if they're right? That's the opening. This is a psychological trap. It's built on confidence and pressure, not legality. The more official someone sounds, the more people second-guess what they already know to be true, especially when it comes to something as intimidating as property law, and Melissa was playing that perfectly. She didn't argue. She didn't explain too much. She just stated it like a fact and kept moving forward with construction. Because momentum creates illusion. If something is already being built, it starts to feel legitimate, even when it isn't. And the truth is, most people would have backed down right there, called a lawyer, waited weeks, maybe months, while the damage kept happening. But sometimes, the only way to break that illusion is to stop playing by their pace and force reality back into the situation immediately. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, not because I had to, but because my mind was already moving, calm, clear, locked in. You ever get that feeling where everything just lines up, like the decision's already been made and your body's just catching up to it? Yeah, it was that kind of morning. Coffee tasted stronger, air felt sharper, even the pasture looked different, like it knew something was about to happen. I stepped outside and sure enough, right on schedule, the trucks rolled back in, same crew, same energy, like nothing had happened, like yesterday wasn't already crossing a line. They went straight to work, picking up tools, measuring again, laughing even, like my land had already been rewritten into theirs overnight. And Melissa, she showed up a few minutes later, clipboard in hand, sunglasses on, walking that same confident walk, like she was managing a project that had already been approved by the universe itself. And I just watched for a second from a distance, letting it play out. Because timing matters. If you move too early, it looks like emotion. If you move at the right moment, it looks like control, and I wanted control. I started walking across the pasture, slow, steady OTS pressing into dirt that I knew better than any map ever could. A couple of the workers noticed me, nudged each other, probably expecting another conversation, maybe even a confrontation this time. But I didn't say a word. I didn't even look at them. I walked right past the stakes, past the torn-up fence line, straight toward the barnyard. And that's when one of them finally called out, "Hey, you can't be back here." I kept walking, because here's the thing, people only say you can't when they think you'll stop. I reached the bulldozer, big, quiet, sitting exactly where it had been left, sunlight hitting the steel like it was waiting. I grabbed the handle, pulled myself up into the cab, and for just a second, everything went still, like that moment right before a storm breaks. Then I turned the key, and the engine didn't just start. It roared, deep, heavy, the kind of sound you feel in your chest before you hear it. And that's when everything changed. Conversation stopped, tools dropped, every head turned at the same time. Because there's no mistaking that sound, not out here, not on open land. I eased the machine forward, slow at first, letting the tracks bite into the dirt, letting them understand exactly what was happening. Melissa took a step forward, hand raised like she was about to say something, but whatever it was, it didn't matter anymore. The distance between words and reality had already closed. I lined up with the first row of those pink survey stakes, those little flags that were supposed to redefine my property, and without hesitation, I lowered the blade. The first push was almost quiet compared to what came next. Wood snapped, plastic tore, dirt lifted like it had been waiting to be moved. The stakes didn't stand a chance. They disappeared under steel like they'd never meant anything to begin with. I kept going straight down the line, one after another, flags flying, splinters scattering, the neat little illusion of new boundaries getting erased in seconds. And that's when the shouting started, muffled at first through the glass, then louder as I got closer to the construction site. Workers backing away, some of them dropping tools mid-step, one guy nearly tripping over a bucket trying to get clear. Because instinct kicks in fast when something that big starts moving your direction. Melissa was yelling now, full volume, pointing, waving, trying to regain control of a situation that was already gone. I couldn't hear her words over the engine, but I didn't need to. I knew exactly what she was saying, something about authority, about stopping, about consequences, the usual script, and then I turned the machine, slow, deliberate, toward the deck, that half-built structure sitting right where it never should have been, fresh wood, clean lines, still smelling like a project that thought it had a future. I rolled forward, blade low, and paused, just for a second, not out of hesitation, but intention, because moments like that, they matter. They draw a line between reaction and decision, and this was a decision. I pushed. The blade met the concrete footings first, and the sound, it wasn't just a crack, it was a deep, grinding break, like something solid realizing it wasn't anymore. The supports shifted, rebar twisted out of place like wire, and the entire front section of that deck dipped, then gave, with splintering, nails screaming loose, boards snapping under pressure. I didn't stop. Another push stronger this time, and half the structure folded inward, collapsing on itself like it had been hollow the whole time. Debris scattered across the yard, stairs breaking apart mid-frame, railing tearing free like it had never been secured, and the workers, they were gone now, completely clear, standing at a distance, watching something they knew they couldn't control. One more push, just one, clean, direct, and the remaining section of the deck shifted, lifted then, slid about 10 feet back, straight across the dirt, until it landed entirely within the HOA's original property line, exactly where it should have been from the start, and just like that, it was over. I eased off the controls, let the machine idle for a second, then turned it back, retracing my path across the pasture, over ground that was finally mine again and more than just paperwork. I parked it right where I found it, shut it down, and the sudden silence hit harder than the noise ever did. No engine, no shouting, just wind moving through grass, and a group of people standing there trying to process what they'd just watched. I climbed down, boots hitting dirt, and that's when Melissa stormed up to me. Face flushed, voice sharp, words coming fast now that she had an audience again. Do you have any idea what you've just done? This is destruction of property. This is illegal. This is... I held up a hand, not aggressive, just enough to stop the momentum. Then I pointed, not at her, but at the ground, at a small, weathered metal marker half buried near the edge of the pasture, the real boundary marker, the one that had been there long before her HOA ever existed. That, I said, calm, steady, is the actual property line. She hesitated, just for a second, and in that second, the confidence cracked. I walked back to my truck, reached in, and pulled out a rolled document. The original survey stamped, signed, recorded with the county. I handed it to her. Not forcefully, just enough that she had to take it. You might want to read that. Her eyes moved across the page, slower now, less certain, and I added, almost casually, I've also got video from yesterday, your crew cutting my fence, placing those markers, building on my land. I let that sit for a moment, then finished it. If this goes further, that's not just a civil issue, another pause. That's criminal. And just like that, everything shifted again, the same way it had when the engine started. Only this time. It was quiet, controlled, real. She didn't yell after that, didn't argue. Because confidence without foundation doesn't survive proof. It collapses, fast. Later that afternoon, the county inspector showed up. Word travels quick when something like that happens. He walked the site, looked at the destroyed deck, the cut fence, the scattered fake markers, the torn soil, and then he looked at the paperwork, my paperwork, and the difference was night and day. He didn't lecture me, not even a little. Every question, every note, every warning went straight to them. Violations stacked up quick, unauthorized construction, property damage, boundary misrepresentation. By the end of it, the HOA wasn't just wrong, they were liable, heavily. Within days, fines were issued, permits revoked, and Melissa, well, let's just say she wasn't president anymore. Turns out confidence doesn't count for much when it's backed by nothing. By the end of the week, crews were back, different ones this time, repairing my fence, reseeding the torn grass, restoring everything they had tried to take. And I got something I didn't expect, a written apology, formal, signed, carefully worded, but still an admission. And as I stood there looking out over the pasture again, quiet, whole, exactly the way it had always been, I couldn't help but think, they really believed those little pink flags meant something. So here's the part nobody really talks about. Not in the dramatic retellings. Not in those quick, gotcha moments that make a story feel satisfying. What actually matters is what was really going on underneath all of it. Because this was never just about a piece of land. It was about control, perception, and how easily people can be pushed into giving up something that's legally theirs. The lesson here is, confidence is one of the most powerful tools in any conflict, but it's also one of the most dangerous when it's used without truth behind it. Melissa didn't win people over with facts. She didn't show paperwork. She didn't even try to prove anything. She just acted like it was already decided, and for a lot of people, that's enough. Because most folks aren't trained to challenge authority, especially when it looks official. Clipboard, survey crew, construction already underway. It creates this illusion that everything must be legitimate. And once that illusion sets in, people hesitate, they second guess, they wait, and in that waiting, they lose ground, sometimes literally. From a legal perspective, this situation could have gone very differently if I had handled it passively. If I had stepped back, called a lawyer immediately, and waited for the system to sort it out, which, don't get me wrong, is often the safest route, but it's also slow. And during that time, the damage continues, structures go up, narratives get reinforced, and suddenly you're not just defending your land. You're undoing a story that's already been built around it, and that's a lot harder. According to standard procedure, property disputes are resolved through documented surveys, title records, and court proceedings, not assumptions, not HOA votes, and definitely not unauthorized construction. But here's where reality and procedure don't always match. Because people don't always follow procedure, sometimes they test boundaries, literally, to see what they can get away with, and if no one pushes back immediately, they keep going. This is a psychological trap. It's built on momentum. The longer something incorrect is allowed to exist, the more real it feels, even to the person being wronged. And breaking that illusion requires something decisive, something that forces everyone involved to stop and reassess what's actually true. Now, I'm not saying the answer is always to fire up a bulldozer. That's not the takeaway here. The real takeaway is understanding leverage, knowing what's actually on your side, facts, documentation, evidence, and using it in a way that matches the situation. Sometimes that means patience, sometimes it means immediate action, but it always means clarity. Because once you're clear on what's yours, legally and factually, everything else becomes noise. And here's another piece people miss. Ego. Ego is what turned that situation from a misunderstanding into a full-blown conflict. If Melissa had just come to me first, had a conversation, even asked a question, none of that would have happened. But ego doesn't ask. It assumes, it pushes, it escalates, and then it doubles down when challenged, until reality forces it to stop, and reality always wins eventually. The only question is how much damage gets done before that happens. And if you're listening to this thinking, well, I'd never fall for something like that. Maybe you wouldn't, or maybe you would, just in a different form. Because these situations don't always show up as land disputes. Sometimes it's contracts, sometimes it's workplace dynamics, sometimes it's relationships where one person slowly redraws boundaries without ever saying it out loud. The pattern is the same: confidence, pressure, momentum, and unless you recognize it, you're already reacting instead of deciding. So yeah, the story ends with a bulldozer, with a deck pushed back where it belonged, with fines and apologies and everything tied up neatly. But that's just the surface. The deeper part, the part that actually sticks, is understanding how close it came to going the other way, how easy it would have been to hesitate, to doubt, to let someone else define reality just because they said it loud enough. And that's the part one want to leave you with, not the destruction, not even the victory, but the awareness. Because once you see that pattern, you start noticing it everywhere, and you get a choice every single time. You either accept the version of reality someone hands you, or you check it, verify it, and stand on what's actually true. And trust me, those two paths lead to very different outcomes. So I'm curious, what would you have done in that situation? Would you have waited, lawyered up, tried to talk it out? Or would you have made a move right then and there? Drop it in the comments. I read more of those than you'd think. And if you want more stories like this, the kind that make you think a little deeper about how people really operate, go ahead and subscribe, because there's a lot more where this came from.